Welcome to Work Like a Human, a podcast from Go Innovation. By now you've probably heard the truism that hiring is broken. If you've ever spent months on a job search submitting resume after resume, it can be a really discouraging and dehumanizing process. It feels really hard to condense all of the qualities that make you a good fit onto a single piece of paper and hope that it gets past all the keyword filters. Ideally, you can network into a position, but even then sometimes it can be hard to know whether that position and that organization is truly a good fit for what you bring to the table. On the other side of the equation, if you're hiring, you know that it can be really difficult to accurately screen for what you know success will look like in that position. And so potentially you're stuck in a really destructive cycle of hiring and investing in someone only to discover later that they aren't a good fit. And then you end up having turnover and you've wasted a lot of money and time. What would it look like if, as an applicant, there was a clear data-based way to know whether you were going to be a good fit for a position or for a team? What would it look like on the other end if there were a data-based way to know, as someone hiring and wanting to develop people, that you could hire not for what they have on a piece of paper, but for who they are and what their skills and abilities actually are? Because at the end of the day, you can train someone in technical skill. It's really hard to train someone to be a humble learner. But being a humble learner makes it a whole lot more likely that you can thrive and learn any technical skill. Well, in a moment, you're going to hear my conversation with Michael Simpson. He's the CEO of a company called PAIRIN, and they're setting out to totally change the game of how people hire, how people apply, and how people are developed, both in personal growth and for workforce development initiatives. They've had a lot of success helping organizations, helping teams, helping individuals, and helping whole states, like their home state of Colorado, totally change the game of hiring. No longer does culture fit have to be something that basically means people who are just like us or who we think we could go have a beer with. Because let's face it, that's a bad way to hire. That sets you up for less diversity in hiring. It sets you up for kind of a silo where people just think and act like you. PAIRIN believes they have found a way to take real data and apply it in a way that can eliminate a lot of these disparities, reduce the friction, and make hiring and workforce development like true science-driven processes that have the best interests of everyone at heart. So full disclosure, I love PAIRIN. As a coach, I use their assessment, which is called the PAIRIN assessment. It measures over 100 coachable attributes, and you can actually chart people's growth in those attributes over time. I've used this with individuals that I've coached, and I use it when doing leader development with teams. In this interview, you hear more from Michael about what PAIRIN does and how they got to where they are today. You'll hear about how he approaches his role as CEO, mistakes that he's made, things that he's learned. There's a lot of gold here. So without further ado, let's step into my conversation with Michael. We start off by just introducing us to PAIRIN. Who are you and what do you do?
PAIRIN is a social enterprise software company based in Denver, Colorado, and our mission is to make education relevant and hiring equitable. And we use behavioral science to accomplish that mission by matching people to careers that are a good fit for them, personalizing their professional development, and also personalizing hiring based on behavioral skills and mindsets.
And so the heart of how you do that is through the PAIRIN assessment, which I am a huge fan of. I use it as a coach. We've used it with working with groups and teams. Describe to us a little bit what that assessment is like and what it can accomplish for someone.
Yeah, the PAIRIN assessment is a behavioral science assessment. It measures 102 behaviors and mindsets in about 10 minutes on a very detailed scale, really a 100-point scale. So it's incredibly granular, and it allows us to get insights into what drives a person, what their motivations are, gaps that they might have that would be related to their jobs and their career aspirations. As a coach, it helps me and other coaches in workforce programs that we work with and organizations like yours be able to get deep insights into where a person is and also uniquely where they want to be. The assessment is core to the development part of our business. It's not foundational to every single thing that we do because our MyJourney platform is actually a platform that's very, very broad, and but the assessment is core to the job matching and the career matching, the professional development pieces.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned MyJourney. Talk a little bit more about what that accomplishes.
Yeah, so a few years ago, we had a career matching tool, pathways tool. We had coaching tips and insights and curriculum for developing people, and then we had a hiring tool. And we realized that we needed a single platform for all of that, and to be able to integrate them all together. It's just easier to sell and support and easier for our customers. And so we set about to build a common platform for that. And about the same time that we were doing that, the state of Colorado came out with a request for information, and they said, we want a single platform to integrate all of our career tools and development tools and resources in the state across 5 different agencies. And we're like, well, that sounds very familiar. We're building something very similar to that. So in 2018, we started building that product, and it honestly has just taken off. It's a product that allows us to manage the process of making wise decisions for individuals, but also for professionals. So as a coach, you would walk someone through in a meeting with them, or what is the outcome that you really want out of either this meeting or the thing that you're pursuing. And then once you determine what the outcome is, then you set goals. And then you determine which steps are required to accomplish those goals. Well, we've essentially set up an entire workflow for outcomes, goals, and steps that can then connect an individual to tools like the PAIRIN survey or our data that are internal, but also external websites, can walk them through the process of personal reflection, can connect them to different types of applications. And so it's essentially a framework that the content can be completely customized. We sold it to states of Colorado, Virginia, large school districts to manage the kind of individual career and academic planning for students from like 6th grade to 12th grade. It's a very robust platform that's very friendly, and it's completely and totally personalized because we go through survey questions and we ask people, the users, really, what are your needs? What are your desires? What's your stage of life? And then we make recommendations of which outcomes would be relevant to them. And so as the content continues to grow and grow and grow, we have just really a robust set of information. States like Virginia are using it to respond to the COVID crisis. And they accelerated their rollout for their 60 workforce centers because they see this as a great way to connect people to emergency services, to unemployment services, to financial aid, et cetera.
Yeah, so I know you guys have a lot of really interesting success stories where people ended up basically being able to find careers that were a much better fit for them, find jobs that maybe like on paper, their resume wasn't quite preparing them for. And I feel like I've kind of just sort of known for a while and seen a lot of people talking about how hiring processes are pretty broken. They can be pretty biased. You just don't really see the full range of what someone's capable of through maybe a traditional resume hiring process. So I'm interested, what are some of those, maybe some general examples of some of those kinds of success stories?
Statistically, there's Stanford research and a whole bunch of other studies that have consistently shown that somewhere between 76 and 87% of the reason why people get promoted or fired are their behaviors. But behaviors aren't typically one of the hiring criteria, right? So if you were to hire for behaviors, 76 to 87% of the time, you're probably not going to fire people for behaviors, right? And so it's also statistically proven that like somewhere around 90% of people have lies on their resumes. So that tells you right there that the criteria with which we're hiring people with is based on false information. And it's also not based on what you truly care about when somebody comes to work. Just the mass amount of applications that companies get just due to, internet access and internet services, we have to create a way to be able to filter out people. We think more, and so there's pre-employment selection systems and applicant tracking systems, and they look for keywords, and if your resume is too graphical, then you're eliminated because they can't read it. And so there has to be this automation process, which kind of takes the human element out of it. So it takes the human element out of it completely from the identifying of talent that could be a fit, but it also eliminates the human element from the people that are applying because it doesn't ask the right questions. When I talk to companies, HR professionals or hiring managers, what's interesting is when I ask them, either if an HR person, what do you ask your hiring manager when you go to try to find an applicant for an open position? And they say, well, we ask them, what do you want? I'm like, really? You think that's the right question? And have you ever asked them, what do they have? Because if you can identify the skills that people have, then you can identify what they need. And frankly, I don't really care what you want. I want someone that I can go mountain biking with. I want someone that I can work with and be buddies with. That's not what I need, and it's also not what I have, right? So the right question has to be asked first, but most folks don't know. Like, they'll make a list of skills that they require, and they'll make a list of experience. And we find that, like for a network administrator, 70% of the jobs require a 4-year degree, but somewhere around 60% of the people that are network administrators currently employed don't have a 4-year degree.
Interesting.
They have a certificate program. So we're asking questions about what we want that aren't relevant to what we have, so they're not connected to what we need. And so the only way to be able to figure that out is to survey the people that you currently have and determine what are the behaviors and mindsets that they have. And what's very interesting is that once you do that, your demographics completely change of the people that you hire. I had one of our great customers. It's a company called Swisslog. It's a young African-American vice president, ran their field service agency. It's like, I think 300 people or something like that around the nation. And he said, Michael, I can't find young people of color that will want to work in the company. And I'm like, you're a young person of color. What's the problem? And he says, our employee base is pale, stale, and male. They're just middle-aged white guys. And I said, well, what is your hiring criteria? And he listed the hiring criteria, and he said, we've tried everything. We 4-year graduates, military personnel, and we still fire a minimum of 8% of our staff every single year. 8% every year.
Wow. Which
is pretty costly. For behavioral issues, they fire other people for different reasons, but for behavioral issues, 8% of their staff is replaced every single year. And I said, well, let's hire for behaviors. So we surveyed their people, and we identified a set of about 20 behaviors and certain kinds of intensities that were a good fit, that were consistent across the people that had been there for a while and were high performers. And so they basically split off half of their hiring just using our behavioral assessment and job interviews and our job interview questions. And the other half, they kept the same. So their percentage of firing people for behavioral issues persisted when they didn't change the process. But after 1 year, all the people that they hired from us, they matched the demographics, the ethnic demographics of the areas with which they were hiring for the first time. In fact, they exceeded it in most areas. And they fired 0 people that year for behavioral issues when they hired for behaviors. So now 5 years later, they have fired zero. They basically fired their internal recruiting team. They have fired 0 people in 5 years for behavioral issues. It saved them millions and millions. I think in the first 2 years, they said it saved them $5.6 million.
Wow.
Right? And that's, to me, it's just logical. Is increasing diversity, so instead of exclusion, it's inclusion.
Yeah.
Because guess what? White people have not cornered the market on good behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody, regardless of your age, your demographic, your orientation, your gender, you can actually perform well and work. And it's really not related to those types of things. So we really focus on inclusion by hiring people based on their abilities and not their histories. I don't care what's written down on your piece of paper. There's certain skills that maybe you have to be trained for, but if we're doing the training internally, I just want people that want to learn, that are inquisitive, that can communicate, that are good team players, that are persistent, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So I would love to maybe shift the focus now to your role with PAIRIN, the company, maybe what the company is like. Because we've worked with your team on a number of occasions, and we basically have loved everyone we work with. You guys seem to have a really great group of people. So, how have you seen some of those things play out with your own workforce?
Yeah, for us, we hire using our own tool, and so I've had like software developers that we'd give a coding test, and one software developer just killed it. I mean, it was like the best coding test we ever had. And then there was another one that wasn't as good, a developer who's a bit more junior, but he matched the criteria of the culture aspects, and our survey showed that he wanted to grow in the ways that we feel like we can develop people in a company. And the other person just wasn't interested in growing. And so we hired the lesser developer, but the person that wanted to develop the most personally. And I told the team, and they're like, well, his skills aren't as good as the one, and this one would hit the ground quicker. And I said, 3 months from now, this person's going to take a huge leap. And honestly, it was less than 3 months. He's one of our top developers right now. And, we hired the lesser experienced person and found the better person for the job. And we do that all the time. We hire people constantly for positions that we know that we're going to do a lot of the training for. What's interesting is I took out education completely from our job descriptions and our online postings, completely eliminated it, and nothing changed. There was no change in our number of applicants or anything. And it just dawned on me, probably most people just don't believe me. And so I specifically put in the education section for a marketing position we had, I said, you'll notice that education requirement is not listed. This is intentional. We want to hire you for your abilities rather than what school you went to or how long you went there. If you feel like you can do this job, please apply. We had 3 times the number of applicants
Wow.
in the next 72 hours than we have ever had for a position.
Wow.
People just thought I left it out before.
Right.
And so we've actually trained. It's like training the flea in the jar with the lid closed. Take the lid off, the flea never jumps higher than the jar.
Yeah.
And so we have to basically take the lid off. We have to coax everybody out, and we have to tell them that we're different and that we're changing the way that hiring is happening. So culturally, we have to make the extra step as a company to encourage people to consider us and consider us differently. And consequently, we literally have emails every few weeks of someone who's worked with us that said, if you ever have a position open, I would love to come work at your company. We're not having trouble finding talent.
You know, I feel like it was popular for a while and maybe still is in some circles to talk about hiring for culture fit over, you know, formal resume. And then I think there's been a little bit of a backlash that culture fit could actually just mean hiring people that are like us and hiring people that may fit into our subconscious bias. You're talking about culture, but what you're actually saying is we make that decision based on data around the behaviors and mindsets that our survey, which is pretty reliable, tells us actually show up in this culture, and that when you actually hire against that target, you achieve greater diversity as well as greater culture fit. So maybe you can tell me, is the distinction essentially whether your idea of culture fit is based in data or not?
For sure.
Yeah.
If it's what you want, right, then you're biased. If it is based on science that is not ethnically bound or gender bound or age bound, then you can make a wise decision. I mean, we just hired a software developer who's Nigerian. We don't have any other Nigerians in our office, and he was a fantastic, perfect fit, right? So culture is based on behaviors, mindsets, and values. And for us, the values piece is absolutely the most important piece. Everybody talks about it. They put it on their walls. They're on posters. But if you talk to anybody in our company and you ask them any question about why they work at PAIRIN, I guarantee you, completely unsolicited, by prompting them with the word, they'll mention our values.
Yeah.
And when I interview people, and I'm usually the last interview, if they're convinced they want someone, they're like, please help us close the deal. And I'll just straight up talk to them. I'll look at their data and I'll say, this is what I see. This is what I see for areas of development. How interested are you in developing? Because if you are not interested in addressing these things, you shouldn't continue in the process of coming to work for us, because we're going to get all up in your chili, right? This stuff that you say you want to develop in, you better buckle up, because we're getting in it. And it will show up, because you've got extreme behaviors here, and there's a flip side to that, right? So all of our greatest strengths also happen to be our greatest blind spots, right? So we're going to talk about it. And when that happens, we're going to get into it. And what our number one value is choose growth over comfort. And if you're looking for a place that's just going to ignore that stuff and brush it under the rug, or just go, I don't want to deal with it, don't work here, because it is not going to go well for you. But if you are interested in development and you're interested in that growth, then this will be the best. This will be a life-changing job for you.
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned values, because we have Go Innovations had the chance to work with you guys now over longer than a year, maybe close to 2 years, of helping you guys clarify your values. And it was really important to you to have everybody on, like all of your team, have some level of ownership over what are your values. Maybe you can speak a little bit to like why, maybe what was that process like, and why was it so important to you to have to do it as an organization?
You know, when I started this company, I was coaching someone, because I'm a certified coach. I was coaching someone, and they had a conversation with me as I was thinking about starting this company. And it was my coachee, my client, that actually challenged me. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to start this company. And this person said, Michael, how many years have you been helping other people figure out how to lead their companies and guiding them in leading their companies? I said, well, quite a while. He says, isn't it about time you proved all these philosophies and ideas out and actually did them yourself? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I basically, set up, when I started this company, all those things that I complained about working for other people, that, one day I'll change. If I was in charge, I would do this. And so I took that to heart, and honestly, we never wrote our values down until 3 years ago. We do an annual offsite up at this hot springs up in the mountains of Colorado, rent cabins, and on the first day, we have all the families come, so partners and husbands and wives, kids and dogs, and so we had a meeting, and we invited all the significant others for our staff to be in this meeting, and we put them into four corners. And although we had never written our values down, we said, we want you to write down the values that you think we have as a company, and the ones that you don't want us to let go of as we grow, because we're growing pretty fast, and any new values that you think we should have that we really don't exhibit. And we had all the significant others participate as well. And then the executives, they exercised our value for Good Craft Microbrew, and we went to the bar, we left, and we let them do that. They broke up into 4 different groups, and they all wrote down their stuff, and then we came back in when they were done, and everybody had a list of things, and then we had them all explain them to us. What was amazing was the consistency. And I'm like, wow, we actually did something that without writing it down, they got something. So there were things like value the whole person. I think all 4 groups wrote this strange phrase, value the whole person. Evidently they felt it or they heard it. And it was the very fact that we had their significant others in the room telling us what values our company should have, was also one of those examples. And so we had them all do that. Then we captured that information. We, as a leadership team, we categorized them down into 5 different groups and their associated behaviors. We created a Google presentation that we allowed everybody, including significant others, to comment on if they had questions or they disagreed with something. And then we went through this process for about a month of coming to agreement on what our values were. So we did not create this. People say, oh, we had, ground up, like not top down. We weren't even in the room.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a risky thing. I've never heard anybody do this before, but I've had other folks now copy it. And so we went through that process initially. The next step was, getting everybody kind of, just really in a deep understanding of what this meant to them in our interaction with each other. And that's when we engaged with Go Innovation to bring us through exercises to kind of deeply explore 2 of these at a time over weekends. And then in this year, we decided that we want to go to the next level of what do these values mean in our interaction with others outside the company rather than just internally. And so how do we value the whole person for our clients and our clients' clients? How do we choose growth over comfort? Like, honestly, if there's a partner that we have or a vendor that we have, that whole growth over comfort thing is it sometimes might be difficult for them because we give them really direct feedback. We say, you know what? If you happen to run into another client in this kind of situation, would you be open to some feedback as to how you might have done this better? And, of course, they usually say yes. I'm not sure if they really mean it all the time, but we give them that feedback, and we'll tell them straight up. And the clients and the vendors, really the vendors that stay with us a lot, just really value that. And they're like, well, you really changed our leadership and that kind of thing. So
yeah, I'm interested. What are some of those you mentioned earlier? You kind of had this idea, all the things the mistakes I see other people making. When I'm a CEO, I'm not going to make those mistakes. Like, what are some of the specific decisions or commitments that you have as a CEO that you believe help to have this like really net positive effect on parents' culture?
Well, I might not be making all those mistakes, but I make my own. I'd say the biggest thing is hire people for character and assume positive intent. And one of our values is remain curious. And so really using the coach approach to leadership, I say, is the most important thing for us. We train every single one of our leaders as coaches. We have our own coaching courses that we provide for our clients. But we also train all of our leaders and any employee who wants to go through it. And so that's really the biggest thing, is that to be able to separate management from coaching. So I've had to learn to separate my meetings, my one-on-ones, is that if we have just a tactical management meeting, I've learned to not try to do coaching in those meetings, but to set a separate time so I'm in the mindset of a question asker, that I can remain curious. I'm not bound by time. I'm only bound by the goals of the individual that I'm coaching at that time. And as long as I can, I will continue to do this. We're growing pretty fast, so I don't know how long I can do that, but I have one-on-ones with every single person in the company. I have a 1 hour one-on-one or 50 minutes with every one of my direct reports, and then I do 30 minutes with every other employee every 2 or 3 weeks. And in those non-direct report meetings, those are just information sessions, coaching sessions. They can ask me anything.
Yeah.
Anything. And they can make the agenda themselves. And I'm just available to them. And I'll be straight and honest with them.
Yeah.
And whatever their question is, I'll do my best to answer it. I think that helps a lot, just accessibility and honesty. I mean, people say that all the time, but I err on the side of giving too much information.
High candor.
People don't. Yeah, well, people sometimes don't want to know how the sausage is made, right? Yeah. But I want them to know that I'm willing to give them that much information. And so I've learned to say, okay, you asked me this question. What level of detail would you like?
Yeah.
And I'm shocked at how often they don't want as much detail as I'm ready to give them, which has been a real learning for me. I just want to know this. I don't want to know all this. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I was about to just blow your mind. So that's been helpful.
So as we're approaching the end of the conversation, one of my favorite questions to ask people is about failure, because I think a lot of people struggle to view failure as something that can actually advance us. A lot of us feel we perceive failure as like a judgment on ourselves. So I'm interested to hear from you. What is a failure, could be personal, professional, that you're willing to talk about with high candor, and what did you learn from it?
You know, I had somebody, a leader, tell me years and years and years ago, you know, when I asked him, when's the right time to let somebody go? And his response was, about the first time you think about it.
Wow.
And as a coach, I don't want to believe that, right? I want to develop people.
Yeah.
But I have been able to put some things in categories related to that. So I don't ascribe to that completely, but when there are character issues, I think it's correct. I have never seen anybody encouraged to humility. I don't think it's possible. I think humility only comes from a cold bucket of water on your head.
Wow.
And I don't think an individual can make another individual humble. That has to come, and an individual can make another individual aware. But we can't create humility in anybody else. And if someone lacks humility, only thing you can give them is facts and consequences. And then if that doesn't work, you have to make a decision for the betterment of everybody in the organization. And so one thing I will not stand for ever again, and I failed too many times giving too many people too many chances, is a lack of humility. Cannot be encouraged. It just has to be fixed.
Man, that's pretty sobering, but I can definitely see the wisdom in that. And I'm trying to think through, like, who have I seen individually, like, honestly move to a space of humility? And it's sort of rare. Like, you tend to encounter people that either have it or they don't, unless you know somebody over a very long period of time. And when you're in a relationship with them as a leader at a company, it's maybe not appropriate to be in a relationship with them for that long period of time.
Well, yeah, it usually happens to be that you bring awareness to that person, and you may not benefit from them absorbing that awareness and then doing something about it. The next company might, but you probably won't, because people's resistance to that is actually, it requires humility to not be resistant to feedback about your lack of humility, right? So how do you get there? Somebody's got to knock the first domino down. And what happens is you put a pebble in somebody's shoe. You say, this is what I observed. This is the consequences. This is the impact of what you did and how it has impacted others, and this is the result. And so what are you going to do about it? And there has to be, as me, the protector of the company, of the culture, not just of our productivity, but of the well-being of everybody here. I have to act, and I've waited way too long, too many times. And so somebody's abilities I can work with if they want to. If they have a desire to change, I will give them all the time in the world. If they're resistant to that, I will cut that off.
Yeah.
And move on every single time. And I have never, ever had any regret except acting too late for letting someone go because of their lack of desire to develop. The only regret I have ever had, regardless of the talent of the person.
Michael, thank you again so much for just sharing what you've shared, spending this time with me. It has been just really helpful. I'm looking forward to people being able to listen to this conversation because I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of people. So again, thank you for spending the time.
It's my pleasure.